So today I'm presenting joint work with Johanna Valenius from Stockholm School of Economics, Can Wealth Buy Health, model with pecuniary and non-pecuniary investments in health. So the main motivation is very close to Vega's paper. So we want to study the life expectancy gap, but between different levels of education. And we document that in the US at age 25, this gap is 5.5 years. And here we count only health-related mortality. So we exclude from the data accidents and homicides. That's why this number is relatively lower compared to what's in the literature. However, we observe similar patterns in other developed countries, and we started questioning whether the gap in the insurance access is to blame for this life expectancy gap in the US.
So when you say similar, this means there's a gap elsewhere, or is it similar size?
It's a similar magnitude.
Similar magnitude.
Yeah. So the life expectancy level is lower in the US, but the gap is more or less the same across all developed countries, irrespectively of the public provisions of care. So we want to understand what are the sources of this inequality, and what does this imply for government interventions like a Medicare for all type of policy, where the US comes closer to the Canadian system, essentially. This is what we're going to start. So I will start with some stylized facts to fix some ideas. This is the probability of survival by age and education, and this is the level of health. And I don't need to explain too much because we use a frailty index, and it was very well explained yesterday. The only difference here is that we want to work with health. So our measure of health is 1 minus the frailty index. And we see that there is a persistent gap in health throughout the life cycle. It's slightly lower at the end of life because of survival bias. But even at very young ages, there is a gap in health. So despite these differences in health, when we take the average medical spending by age and education, which includes all sources, out-of-pocket, covered by insurance, we see that essentially there is no difference in the medical spending. So there is the same slope and very, very small differences.
No gender controls?
Sorry?
No sex controls?
No, this is on average. So we are going to work on men for the rest of the paper because we have labor supply, but this is for everyone. And we see that essentially there is no difference. So we try to decompose total medical spending between preventive and curative. And here we need to take a stand because it's not easy to draw the line what is preventive and what is curative. So what we do, we observe in the MEPS medical conditions that the individuals report, and we calculate what is the average medical spending of individuals that report no new conditions, that they have an above median level of health, and their spending is below the 75th percentile. And we do that to exclude individuals that they need to spend on curative medical spending because they just experienced a health shock. But we also exclude individuals that have chronic conditions, and they don't report something new, but they need access to healthcare anyway. So we estimate what is the average of this group by education, and then we try to infer what fraction of the total medical spending is on curative and what is on preventive. With preventive, it's just a residual.
So one favor, can you just go back one slide? Just one slide, I just didn't really. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So what we see essentially is that college graduates spend an equal proportion of on curative and preventive medical spending, and high school graduates spend money on their health when they get sick. So even though overall they spend more or less the same, the spending and subsequently what's going to be the effect on their health is going to be different. The investments in terms of money that high school graduates are making are substantially lower compared to college graduates. So they just react essentially to negative health shocks. So despite the difference in spending, so we know from the literature, it's a very well-established fact that nearly 50% of all deaths are attributed to behavioral factors. Some of them are positive, like a healthy diet, exercise, or wearing, for example, the seatbelt. Others are negative, like smoking or heavy drinking. So we are going to focus on the positive. that require some time investment. So essentially, we are going to focus in this paper on exercise and time spending visiting the doctor or self-care. And here we use data from the ATUS, and we see that again there is a gradient by education. College graduates spend more time in their health with our definition compared to high school graduates, and this gradient is throughout the life cycle. The difference is not that big in terms of hours per year, but even small investments in health can have very large effects. So for example, if individuals jog for 30 minutes per week, their cardiovascular risk goes down substantially. So we don't need very large differences to have a significant impact on health. So this is a more qualitative explanation about what kind of preventive services these individuals use. And this takes both money and time. So college graduates are more likely to do a routine check, take the blood pressure, do the flu shot, or visit the dentist compared to high school graduates. One explanation might be the state of insurance in the US. They don't have access to the same insurance opportunities. They don't pay the same amount out of pocket. So that's a brief description of the US healthcare system. So everyone is covered after the age of 65 through Medicare. And before the age of 65, individuals are either covered by group health insurance, which is subsidized by the employer. They can purchase private health insurance, or if they qualify, they can enroll in Medicaid. Otherwise, they remain uninsured.
So we can go back to slides.
Two slides?
Yeah, one more. Instead of doing high school versus college, can you do within conditional on insurance status and see to what extent it's purely just picking up the differences in taking of insurance? So is a high school graduate with insurance acting as a college graduate with insurance? If so, is purely just the insurance channel, or is it more than just that?
Yeah, so that's an interesting suggestion. We haven't done that. So here's the pure discrete statistic unconditional, but it's a very good idea. Any other questions? So here is the extent of this gradient. So this is the percentage of uninsured by age and education. Individuals that have any private or rely only on public health insurance. High school graduates are more likely to be uninsured. They are less likely to have any private health insurance, and they are more likely to rely only on public health insurance. So another dimension with respect to the gradient is the difference in health shocks. So in this paper, we don't treat the changes over time of health as shocks. We try to use the data to estimate the magnitude of the shocks. We actually use the same method as Maria Panos. So we look at the medical conditions that the individuals report at the MEPS, and then we use the WHO burden of disease, and we assign an index to each specific condition that they report. So for example, some forms of cancer have 0.6, with 1 being death. If you have the common cold, it's like 0.01. So we try to estimate these, and health shocks are only newly reported. So we start from the second wave of the MEPS, and it's only conditions that were not reported previously. So it's pure shocks. And we see that until later in life, high school graduates experience larger shocks. This is unconditional on health, it's just the magnitude. And there are many explanations for this. So educated individuals are more likely to comply with treatments that require complex technologies and lifestyle changes. So if someone has diabetes, they are more likely to change their lifestyle, be more regular with their insulin shots. So they are less likely to have to be immune compromised and experience health shock in the future. There is a significant effect of causal effect of schooling. We also have differences in habits that we are not going to capture directly in the model. So maybe these individuals are more likely to smoke, that's why they suffer a larger shock. And early life conditions, that they start with a lower level of health, and having been less healthy, these individuals are more prone for future health shocks. So these are all stuff that we are not going to model explicitly. These effects are captured with the distribution of the health shocks in our model. So what do? We develop a life cycle model to rationalize these gradients. We try to fit the data as much as we can, and then we use that model to study what would be the effect of a medical policy with different financing mechanisms. Today I will discuss only one, which is the best case scenario. So the key features are that individuals can invest both money and time in their health, that we do have curative medical spending, and we have the education-specific distribution of health shocks that we take from the data. So the first two are very instrumental for the results, because individuals can, if they have access to health insurance, the effective price becomes lower. They can spend more money in their health, but they can substitute with less time. The second is that individuals, once they get insured, they do invest in their health, so it's cheaper to do that, but they have less incentives to do that because now the curative medical spendings are not as severe to be paid out of pocket. So I'm not going to focus too much on the literature. The closest paper to ours is by Oskan that also has preventive and curative medical spending, but both are a choice. So to the best of our knowledge, there is no model that has medical spending partially as a choice and partially as an exogenous process that needs to be paid. So Oskan tries to explain something else, why individuals have zero spending in some years, and why there is a gradient in that. But both of these spendings are a choice. Any questions? Yeah.
No, nothing.
Okay.
Was asking.
So what do we find? So Medicare for All does little to close the life expectancy gap. And depending how we want to finance the reform, because we study an increase in the premium, which is essentially a lump sum tax, an increase in the income tax level, an increase in the income tax progressivity, and an increase in the copay rate, or a decrease in the coinsurance rate. So essentially everyone is covered, but there is some form of rationing and everyone's covered less. So under specific scenarios, life expectancy can actually drop. However, we do find that this reform improves welfare. The Gini coefficient for consumption and quality goes down, and individuals, especially high school graduates, are better off. Because now they have less uncertainty with respect to medical spending and the disposable income is higher. So it is consistent with your results, and quantitatively the magnitudes are very similar. So we find that differences in income, preferences, and health shocks explain this life expectancy gap. Once we sat down the initial difference in health, we don't find that the life expectancy gap drops substantially. I will explain why. It doesn't mean that early life conditions don't matter. It's mostly because we just sat down the health differences that has been realized until age 25. Because initial early life conditions are not sat down if you continue to have different distribution of health shocks over the life cycle. So in the model, individuals choose consumption, savings, prevent medical spending, time spending work, and health promoting activities. The labor choice is only in the extensive margin. Age and space uncertainty with respect to their labor income, the curative medical spending, their health, and the health insurance status. And education affects the level of productivity, the distribution of health shocks, the probability of receiving a group health insurance offer.
What do you mean by detects uncertainty with respect to insurance status? That they might be excluded from the insurance?
So we assume that if they get a group health insurance offer, they automatically enroll because the take-up ratios are very high. But whether they take it or not is uncertain every period. And it depends on the level of education. High school graduates are less likely to receive this offer. And they need, if they don't receive that offer and they don't qualify for Medicaid, they need to buy private health insurance on their own, and this is very expensive. Yeah.
What are you thinking about when you say that education affects the distribution of health insurance?
It's
I know you cited here as right, but what are you thinking about? I mean, why does it affect it? Why does your education affect? I mean,
okay.
since you ruled out things like living in neighborhoods with, I'm assuming, pollution, greater pollution, or greater probability of gunshots or automobile. I'm not sure what you're thinking about.
So here, so first, because we give this explanation, here. So maybe, for example, they have a heart attack and then they don't follow the direction of the doctor, and they are more likely to have a second one because they're not going to fix their diet and follow the proper treatment. So this is one explanation. Another explanation is that they have different habits.
Not doing this. It doesn't have to do so much with the distribution of the shots. It seems like it's the curative or preventative part is not being as efficacious.
Yes, the first version of the model had also a gradient in the effectiveness. When we try to estimate it within the model, it goes away once we take into account the different distribution of the health shocks. So some of these differences, because we see that we capture the different conditions that they have over the life cycle, if we also assume that high school graduates are less effective when they spend any dollar amount that they spend, we overestimate what would be the gradient in health.
Yeah, I guess I'm just not sure what you're saying. That isn't any. I don't think any example that you gave me was anything different than efficaciousness. That's my issue. I mean,
well,
I didn't hear
habits,
an
for
example
example,
that was. Sorry?
Habits, for example, is not about the effectiveness of investments. We don't model smoking, so high school graduates are more likely to smoke, so this will have an effect on the distribution of the health shocks. So that is something that doesn't relate to the effectiveness of investments.
Okay, but you see that as something that's influenceable by policy. If I say no smoking in restaurants, that's going to have information of smoking, but if I don't say no smoking in restaurants.
Yeah, so we cannot, in principle,
I'm just having a hard time with thinking about how you're going to interpret things.
Yeah, so we cannot be explicit about smoking because other models take that explicitly into account and over time to explain differences in health over time. So we don't. We just assume that in order to explain why they do have the differences, we just try to give this explanation that we are not going to model.
Okay.
So, So health affects the level of utility directly, the probability of survival, labor productivity, only for high school graduates, which is consistent with the Kopecky results, and the distributions of health and curative medical spending shocks. So an individual is born with a fixed level of education that they cannot change. They observe what is the level of assets, the level of health, and the productivity shock. Then they learn whether they get the group health insurance offer. Once this is resolved, they either get it or they decide to buy private health insurance or they remain uninsured. The curative medical spending shock and the health shocks are realized, and then they decide about consumption, preventive medical spending, time investment, and assets, and labor supply. So agents have preferences over consumption, the level of health, time spent on work, and health activities. This is the only cost of the investments in time. So for example, there is no basket of goods that they need to buy like a gym membership. So for us, we cannot really see what happens if if we subsidize, for example, gyms. It's purely a utility cost. So there's
differences in preferences?
Yeah, we have different preferences with respect to labor supply and the time investment.
So not discount, I mean, if you just think of the standard order equation, most likely you'll be able to identify differences and discount factors when we correlate with educational attainment.
Yeah, so
one of the reasons why you're investing less in preventive care, so I mean, part of the life expectancy gap might just be attributable to the differences in discount.
So you're saying that instead of having the grading in different preferences here, we could have different discount factors to achieve the
So
same
you can
effect.
see all, like the wealth to education gaps. There are a lot of things that we correlate now,
Yeah.
which suggests differences in discounting.
Yeah.
So it might be like if you have to have preference heterogeneity, that sounds like an easier choice.
Yeah.
It would be consistent with more facts than just in terms of the time investment for my health.
Yeah. So to be clear, in the model there is no difference in the discount rates. They have the same. They have different effective discount rates because they have different mortality risk. But yeah, it's something to consider. Okay. So this is the evolution of health over time. So health is persistent. There is a stochastic depreciation of health with the distribution that I described earlier. And then we simply have a Cobb-Douglas. This effectiveness and the share of medical spending are age-specific. Essentially, we assume that some preventive medical spending is not effective when you are younger. Uh, there are some preventive tests that it doesn't really make sense to do that very early in life. So this varies over the life cycle. So in the beginning, healthy time is much more effective compared to prevent medical spending. And the mortality risk is simply the deviation of, so individuals have a baseline mortality risk, and any deviation from the maximum level of health amplifies the mortality risk. So here is a typo, it's 8 minus 8, but yeah. I thought I corrected it. So individuals have pretty standard budget constraints in these models. They allocate the disposable income between general consumption, out-of-pocket medical spending, and savings. The disposable income is essentially the after-tax labor income, which depends on the labor choice, the productivity that depends on the level of health, age, the education level, and the productivity shock. They can receive, they do receive Social Security payments after the age 65, transfers if they cannot achieve the minimum level of consumption, and disability insurance benefits if they qualify. So here, the disability insurance benefits are a choice. Individuals can opt in. They need to drop out from the labor market, but the level of health needs to be below a specific threshold in order to qualify and apply. The out-of-pocket medical spending it depends on the insurance state of the individual. They need to pay a premium if they do have insurance, and this affects the copay rate, the co-insurance rate here, and just a fraction of the medical, preventive medical spending and the curative medical spending. So we have 5 health insurance states in the model. We have Medicare for individuals over 65, Medicaid if the level of consumption is below the threshold or the income is below the Medicaid threshold, a group health insurance with a probability that depends on education and age. So it's essentially everyone is covered up to 65, and the only uncertainty is whether I'm going to get a group health insurance offer before 65. If I don't, then I choose, essentially, the choice is whether I have private health insurance or I remain uninsured.
I'm sorry, I still have a hard time understanding what is the uncertainty regarding the group health insurance. Does it mean it depends whether you work or not, or also in the type of job you are going to have, or the type of occupation you have, the type of enterprise you are in, or what?
So all this matter in the data. In the model, it's just education and age specific. We assume that you have better jobs as you get older, and if you have better occupation.
The probability of having this group insurance simply increases with your age and your education.
Yeah. So primates, college graduates have like more than 80% chance of getting a group health insurance offer. It's substantially lower for high school graduates.
And sorry again, and you cannot have both group health insurance and private health insurance.
No.
Because
but
in Canada, this could be the case, that we are insured by our job, but we could also have a supplemental mental health.
Yeah. So private insurance per se is not very common because this is pre-Obama care. So it's not very cheap to buy that. It's also, here we do have discrimination. So the premium that you need to pay for private health insurance depends on the expected medical spending that you're going to face. So unhealthy high school graduates that they would like to buy health insurance, it's just too expensive for them. So they don't really have the incentive to do that, especially if they're already covered. And because I will show we calibrate the coinsurance rate from the data. The coinsurance rate of the group health insurance is higher than the private health insurance. It would be, unless we have like some way to just show how much your effective coinsurance rate goes up, they will never do that.
So is the likelihood of getting group insurance IID every period given age and
Yeah.
education?
So we played with,
I mean, it's insanely persistent in the data. It's like 90%
Yeah.
probability that I will get it next year if I have it this year. So why wouldn't you allow it to also vary with term status?
so initially what we had in the beginning of the period, initially what we had was group health insurance as an absorbing state. You have a probability to get it, and then if you do, then it's fixed. Of course, the probabilities were different to account for that. But the results are not very different. So we went to the other,
Yeah,
we went to the other extreme.
Yeah. No, 'cause I mean, there's more risk in your model than
Yeah.
there will be in the data. So
Quantitatively?
going on it, so it's about 90% chance that you will maintain it over a 2-year period. And if that goes up even more as you age, so it will get closer and closer to that absorbing state. And it's less persistent for non-educated than for educated, but for among the educated people, you're gonna have more risk in your model than they will face in the data.
So it's true that we go from one extreme to the other, and usually we split based on the referee comments. But we observe that quantitatively it doesn't really matter. So this uncertainty doesn't really affect the results. So in practice, it can be either or. Because to be honest, when you have an 80% chance to get group health insurance, that's pretty persistent already, especially for college graduates. So the government provides Social Security benefits and Medicare after the eligibility age. Medicaid for individuals, yes, this is what I want to say. You can't get group health insurance initially and then end up with Medicaid if you experience a very large medical spending shock. And then we assume that you automatically drop out from group health insurance. You have better co-insurance coverage because of Medicaid, and you pay no premium, but then you are forced to hold zero assets. So it's the only transition after the decision of the health insurance status. It's the only transition that is allowed. So disability benefits for individuals that drop out from the labor market and their health is below the disability insurance threshold, and transfers that guarantee a minimum level of consumption. So the government is spending is financed with a progressive income tax, the consumption tax, the Medicare premium, and the Social Security tax. May I have some water?
Yeah.
Okay. So we do a two-step parameterization. So we estimate as many parameters as possible from the data. We set exogenously some parameters that are very common in the literature, and then we use indirect inference. So we use data from the MEPS, the HCUS, PSAD, CDC, and ACS. Yeah. So for the distribution of the health shocks, we use the same method as Maria Panos. We use the medical conditions file of the MEPS, and we only use innovations. And we merge this data set with the global burden of disease to estimate what is the magnitude of these diseases. And then we divide the health shocks in 3 bins, the bottom 50th percentile between the 50th and the 95th, and the top 5% of the health shocks. And then we approximate that with a regression using age, education, and health. And with this method is, as in the NARDI chart, knowledge how to model the distribution of the health shocks. So for the probability of the group health insurance, we just run a probit, and it's conditional on age and education. And then for the coinsurance rates and the premium, We use essentially the effective coinsurance rate in the MEPS. What fraction of medical spending is out of pocket from someone that reports that have a group health insurance? Medicare and Medicaid have higher coinsurance rates compared to group health insurance and private health insurance. Private health insurance is not generous at all. And here the insurance premium is endogenous. We assume that the premium that you are going to pay is the average medical spending of your age and education group in the next period, plus a markup. With respect to the effect of health on wages, so we use exactly the same method as Hosseini et al. We use the PSID data. We use the same selection correction. We obtain naturally the same results because we have the same sampling. The only difference is that instead of rates, we use health because this is how we construct the model. And we also find that health doesn't really matter for the wages of college graduates. And that might be because they work on different occupations that health is not as, doesn't have such large adverse effects on productivity. And this has implications in our model because then when we want to shut down the income channel, to shut down the difference in income, high school graduates and college graduates do not have the same incentives with respect to health. So in ceteris paribus, high school graduates should care more about their health because it affects their wages. So here we have one discount factor, the risk elasticity of labor supply, and the concavity of these criteria. We assume that they share the same value. These are pretty standard values in the literature for the progressivity of income and the marginal replacement rate for pensions. So here we use, because to reduce the state space, individuals get a pension that is derived from the average income of their education throughout the life cycle. So high school graduates get on average a lower pension. So the rest of the parameters are the age-specific productivity that we need to estimate with indirect inference, the share of medical spending in the production function, the preference parameters, and as I said, the coefficient, the preferences for time investment and leisure are education-specific, the probability of survival, and the markup for health insurance and the threshold for the disability insurance benefits. And we want to match the mean healthcare spending by age and education, the mean level of health by age and education, the life expectancy gap, the share of private health insurance by education, the ratio of time spent in health promoting activities, how much more time college graduates spend compared to high school graduates, the employment at 63, and the disability benefits at 61. So this is just the standard that we want to minimize the distance from the data. So this is the fitness of the model. So we underestimate slightly how much they're going to spend throughout the life at the end of a life cycle. We have a hit, we don't hit that well the level of health at the end of life. It's something that we want to live with because the evolution of the health shocks is not the change in health over the life cycle as a standard in the literature. It's an exogenous estimation. So we are willing to sacrifice the fit a bit for more discipline about these shocks. With respect to the moments, the life expectancy gap is pretty close to the actual data. We have a higher investment in terms of time. And this is not a typo. We actually have higher private health insurance, like 0.19 instead of 0.14, and 0.14 instead of 0.19. The biggest issue with the model is that we cannot generate disability insurance benefits for the high school, for the college graduates. So the compensation that they could get, even though there are individuals that can qualify in principle, because the level of health is below the threshold, the compensation that they would get, that we estimate from the MEPS data, is not high enough for them to apply for disability insurance. And then the labor force participation at 63, which is a very close fit. With respect to the external validation, so the income elasticity that we estimate, so here we do an exercise where we increase the income of everyone by 10% and see how much their spending changes. It's very close to the estimates in the literature, which is 0.74. And the price elasticity for preventive medical spending is minus 0.24, which is also very close to the literature. The good thing about this model is that we separate the preventive and curative medical spending. So when we make the comparison between what we consider as preventive medical spending is closer to the definition of preventive medical spending in the empirical literature. Because usually in these structural models, preventive medical spending is the totality of your medical spending. So what we do next is implementing the Medicare for All type of policy. So everyone is covered by Medicare. So the government covers 73% of all medical spending. And the private health insurance market is eliminated. And we balance the government budget with an increase in income tax progressivity. So I mentioned all the other ways that we try to balance the budget with a change in the premium, the copay rate, and the tax level. They are strictly worse, so this is the best case scenario. So if we care about the welfare and the life expectancy of high school graduates, this is strictly better policy. So we are going to focus on that.
But what do you do with Medicaid since Medicaid has lower co-insurance rate than Medicaid?
So yeah, so some force them to enroll in Medicaid when they are hit with a very high curative medical spending shock, because that's unavoidable.
When we go on the 5%.
I mean, if you are hit with a very high curative medical spending shock, essentially you are covered 100% by the government. So this cannot be avoided. The only way to avoid that is if you somehow, in this exercise, bound the curative medical spending, but then it becomes too cumbersome. So this is a very expensive policy. So this is the change in the total labor income that you need to pay. This also includes the Social Security tax. So we try to change the slope of the tax schedule and keeping, because if it's going to just shift, individuals that are in low income, they are going to actually pay less taxes. So we try to correct for that. So at the lowest income, we are going to force the individuals to be taxed at least the same tax rate as before. So we do a slight correction in the tax schedule. So what we find is that high school graduates and college graduates spend more in their health after the reform because it makes sense, and until age 65, because this is when this policy is relevant. Everyone was covered after 65 anyway, so these individuals face some uncertainty with respect to the health insurance status, or they did have health insurance, but it was not as generous as the Medicare. So they do increase their medical spending, but they marginally decrease their time investment, and in the end, health doesn't change. So this result is consistent with empirical estimates from the Oregon experiment, where we do see more utilization of care, but not real effect in ways that we can measure with respect to health. And one explanation is that maybe you are more likely to go to the doctor, but maybe you are going to reduce your jogging time. So this is both for college and high school graduates. So essentially, the life expectancy gap doesn't change. So quantitatively, we do find a very, very small change. But given what is the level of the gap, we consider that to be non-essential. However, we do find that welfare increases for high school graduates by 4.4% of equivalent consumption. And this comes both from the reduction in the uncertainty and the fact that their disposable income is higher because they have insurance. So, and we also have a reduction in the Gini coefficient. So this is not something that we target. We generate 0.23, which is the estimate of group care for consumption equality in the US. And it's a very large drop in the consumption inequality. So overall, this policy is welfare increasing, but if the target of the government is to decrease life expectancy inequality or to improve health in general, health insurance doesn't really help. So now we try to decompose between factors that do affect health. So we are going to shut down subsequently any differences across education. So we are going to shut down the difference in elites and health. So they are going to enter the economy with the same distribution, the high school graduates as the college graduates. So all the changes here are making in one dimension high school graduates the same as the college graduates. We increase the labor income, which is a little bit tricky. We keep the same function for the labor income process, which includes the fact that high school graduates do care about their health and when it comes to labor income, but college graduates don't. But we estimate what would be the compensation to have on average, given the level of health, on average the same level of income by age. So this is the exercise. So essentially we are giving an increase in the wage by hour, excluding any effect on health. So this is shutting down the level of shocks, the differences in shock. This is the health shocks that college graduates face. What happens if high school graduates face the same? And then shutting down the preference heterogeneity with respect to time investment. So the biggest change is with respect to labor income. And the reason is that here life expectancy is endogenous. So we do have the effect of the value of statistical life. Individuals, as they become richer, they increase their consumption, but they also want to extend their life expectancy. So it's the trade-off between increasing consumption within period compared to increasing the number of periods is in favor of investing more in health. We see that time preferences also matter, so we had to force these differences. Maybe we can achieve the same effect with different discount rates, but unless we assume that high school graduates, for some reason, they dislike exercise more, we cannot generate this gradient. And of course, the health shocks, because they are much larger for high school graduates.
Have you looked at the wealth to education gradient in your model? Does it match it?
So, no, we only match the aggregate. So we try to match, it's not here because it's not the target in the newer version of the model. We only target the average, the ratio of savings to labor income. So we don't try to match these gradient with respect to wealth.
So that would be one moment you can use to pin down
Yeah.
the differences in discount factors.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. So just dropping out completely the preferences of the 80 and then targeting these values. So there is an issue that I have faced in this class of models. So individuals want to smooth consumption and we can achieve these saving ratios because they can only do that through savings in the standard model. Here they can also smooth their utility over time with health. They have less incentive to smooth through consumption and savings. So in our experience, you need a very high warm glow bequest motive to achieve these ratios. So the shape is, instead of having the same shape as Marcus, for us it's actually a little bit higher at the end of life because of the incentive to have bequests. Otherwise, we cannot keep that ratio. So to use that, it's going to be a very hard data point to actually match with the model. So how do individuals react? So essentially here is the exercise where high school graduates become richer. They have more resources to spend, so they spend more money in their health. But they also spend more time. And as I said, time here is free, it's not worth anything. So they don't need to buy a gym membership, they just need to spend some time. And because the way that we model the labor supply choice and the time investment, there is no opportunity cost of time. So individuals do not derive utility from leisure. So there are two independent choices, and we can do that because none of them bind. and labor supply is on the extensive margin. So individuals here spend more time because they want to survive for longer. They want to sacrifice some current period utility to increase the periods that they can derive utility from. And we see this is a change in the level of health for high school graduates. So when we reduce the health shocks, medical spending doesn't really change. If anything, is slightly lower. So the shocks that they experience now are less severe, but they spend substantially less time. And I say substantially because this drop has a relatively large effect. But because the health shocks had such a high magnitude, in the end, they end up with better health. So essentially, they have the opportunity now, given the maximization problem, to not invest as much money and time, especially time. And individuals in our model, they will always do that in the first sign of opportunity, because to achieve this number of time investment, they must heavily dislike exercise. Because medical spending is not as effective in their production function. Time is very, very effective. In order to achieve this level of investment, it must be that they hate exercise. The coefficient is enormous. So they just reduce their time investment. And if we don't assume that they dislike it as much, they don't substitute away medical spending. They keep the level of medical spending the same. They spend much more time, and this has important implications for their health. So it's more than 2.5 years in the increase in life expectancy. I went too fast, right?
You're at 11, so you still have 15 minutes.
Okay, yeah, I went too fast because I'm done. I miscalculated. I was expecting. Yeah, I was expecting more questions. I also talked too fast. So what we find essentially is that if we're going to make this reform, it should be financed, and we care, and the target is to improve the welfare and the general outcomes of high school graduates. If we want to do this reform, it should be financed with an income tax progressivity, an increase in income tax progressivity. And the target should not be a change in the health outcomes. It should be just the consumption inequality and the welfare of high school graduates. And the reason is that making healthcare spending cheaper is going to induce the agents in our model to just reduce the time investment that they are making. It's also the fact that they have less incentive because now curative medical spending becomes less important. They are covered, so they don't have an incentive to invest in the health, become healthier, and reduce the magnitude of these shocks. And we find, because income matters so much, so here wealth is a very generous description of what we are doing. Labor income in particular matters so much for the decisions that they are making, despite the fact that they face different distribution of health shocks, and maybe because they have habits that we don't model here. Despite all these other differences, labor income is still very important for the decisions that they are making. How worth it is this for them to try and increase their life expectancy? So wealthier individuals are more willing to sacrifice current consumption and leisure in order to live a healthier and longer life compared to high school graduates. Yeah. Any questions?
I may have one question or comment. I think I did the same comment to Vegard yesterday, and I was wondering whether it would be interesting to make like kind of a cost and benefit analysis, like how much it costs to make the Medicare reform and how much you would gain on the life expectancy side. Like, okay, you said that it has a small effect on life expectancy, but then you can always put a price on one additional year. And you could see, and even you can, as in the GAP's paper, you could go, let's say, part by part and add several dimensions of benefits, one after the other, and see whether it would make this reform worse or not. Like, you see what's happening on the life expectancy gradient, but how much you can price that, you can put a price on life, and then you can see what are the gains in terms of health. Also, you can also put a price on that too, and so.
So,
Because it
Yeah.
was a bit like that also for the models of the Margaris today. I was a bit frustrated. It's a big word, but I was not really frustrated. But that I see that you have gains. I see that it costs something, but on net, what should I learn?
yeah, so here we have, in terms of equivalent consumption, so there is a net positive effect for high school graduates. And this is not only about health. So if we want only talk about life expectancy and health, this number is actually lower because they do get some utility from increased consumption and the loss of uncertainty because there is a
So
utility cost.
Sorry, what you're saying is that in the welfare you're including gains in life expectancy.
Yes, yes.
Yes, of course, because in the welfare function you have that consumption is expected.
Yeah, exactly.
Is expected utility. So the gain you have on the survival probability is embodied in this life expectancy utility, in this lifetime utility function. But it's what I'm saying. It's a bit different to consider simply gains in life expectancy. This would be an additional measure. It's a bit different to consider welfare increase, which embodies gains in consumption, in health, in survival probability, and to consider simply gains in terms of life expectancy. And for that, you would need to have measures of how much is worth one additional year of life.
Okay, I see. So in this version of the model, we don't report the value of statistical life. We do in the US version. So what we could do, because essentially we're estimating that as an external validation, what is the value of an extra year of life at different ages?
Exactly.
And then we can multiply that with the actual gain that you have. Because it's not 1 year, it's like less, so it's like 0.1 times.
Exactly.
Like a monetary value for that.
What
Yeah.
does it mean completely?
Yeah. This is something that can be calculated.
And you can even use quality measures, like then it would be weighted by the health,
Yeah.
the gain in health.
Yeah, I'm not sure how we can translate. Maybe you know because you use the same index, but I'm not sure how we can translate the frailty index to a quality index.
No, there are ways. I mean, there are conversions. So zero frailty is one quality, and one frailty is completely failed as zero quality.
But it's not. It's not.
No, but there's conversion between.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that would be. Yeah, that would be.
Or if the value is
It's easier to communicate.
Just take the value of life. I mean, there have been some empirical papers about that, trying to do the price on life.
Yeah. So the fitness doesn't change that much. We make some changes. So the US version of the model has 5 million for high school graduates and 7 million for, which is in the bounds of the literature, for 7 million for college graduates.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So essentially, it's just an easier way to communicate the results, right? Because you could explain the welfare gains simply by that, but it just make it easier to decompose and have a dollar value to the gains. Yeah. And the equality adjustment for health.
And if I may have another, if I can use the time for another question, can you go back to the expected utility function?
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, so yeah, but then when you take you're going to, so this is a per period utility function, right?
Yeah.
And then you multiply every per period utility function by the probability to be alive. Yes,
Yeah.
the thing that you had on the slide after that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, coming from a field, a more theoretical field, I mean, there is this literature about temporal risk aversion. So when you simply add up utility weighted by the survival probability, you make an implicit assumption that the individual is temporal risk neutral. And
Yeah.
which is quite different than what you may observe in reality. that people may value differently, maybe risk averse toward their, how can I phrase that? About variations in the uncertainty of life.
Yeah.
And I mean, maybe it's too complicated to do that in this type of model, but
Yeah,
I think it's quite important that to be aware at least that when you do those type of modeling, when you use this type of modeling, then you make this type of assumption, which may be a bit different than what you observe in reality. And there have been some empirical papers trying to show also that in fact people may be temporal risk averse.
So I agree. I'm not sure how easy it would be to have, because
fact,
here
you
essentially,
have to do a kind of concave transformation.
with respect to the discount rate.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how easy it would, because for us,
Yeah.
the problem is that it's endogenous. So it's even more complicated. It's not like.
What is endogenous? The survival
Yeah.
functionality? Yeah.
So I'm not sure. We can try.
Don't you
But-
get time inconsistency problems?
Yeah, I think that is the problem,
Oh,
right?
have you started to put that criteria?
No, it's not time inconsistency.
Well, most transformations that you're going to do
Yeah, I
are
think.
going to give you time inconsistency. So that's one of the reasons that people don't play around with.
Yeah.
What do you, maybe I don't understand what you're saying.
That what you would choose at time 0 for your future plan would differ from what you would choose at time 2 for your future plan, once you get to time 2. Because all of a sudden now you
Yeah,
change
yeah,
your
yeah.
discount factor. I don't know, maybe not, but I would have thought you would.
But it depends, in your model, people are going to change their decision one period after the other, or they are going to make different decisions
Yeah.
one period after the other. Then yes. it would be like
So it's not here, but
Yeah.
we have a constant in the utility function. So you do lose something if you die. So we don't take this uncertainty effect into account, but you do lose something if you die. So, yeah.
Different point. You do this in a way a very large reform, right? But it doesn't seem to be like a very efficient reform in a sense, because it's sort of a huge reform to address like a very particular issue, and it's not clear
Yeah.
that the welfare gains come from what you're actually trying to address, because like so many things are going on at the same time, right? Also the change in the tax system and all that. So I mean, I don't have a concrete proposal here, but I wonder if aren't there more targeted reforms that we were considering here?
Yeah, so in the cluster right now, we have another reform where we give Medicare for the ones that don't qualify for group health insurance, because essentially we want to see only how the uninsured are affected, because there is a hidden effect of this reform. This is not a general equilibrium model like your model. So we have a fixed premium unless we assume that it's the premium that changes to balance the budget, and it's cheaper to be on Medicare compared to group health insurance. So not only you get better coverage, you pay a lower premium. So we want to see for the uninsured only, what is the benefit of having this reform, and then it needs to be financed. The other thing that we are trying, because the government covers too much, and the tax rate needs to adjust so much here. We had, because it's not general equilibrium, no one necessarily pays for your private health insurance, and then suddenly, because it's not a market that clears, and then suddenly you have every spending to be covered by the government, and suddenly you need to pay for that. So we try to estimate what would be the net change in the government spending to have a more accurate reflection of how the tax rate is going to change. So we try to make both the reform smaller and the effect on the tax rate smaller and more representative. But do you have any other suggestions in mind, like subsidizing private health insurance, something like that, which is even smaller? The thing is that with smaller reforms, you are going to get smaller effects. So this is the best case scenario for the high school, that you didn't have health insurance before, you get a very generous relative to the private one, and then someone else has to pay for that.
But you might get smaller effects, but you might get more targeted effects, and that might be good. Right? I had missed some, for example, that it was not general equilibrium. So you don't. So are these taxes, are they going to affect the aggregate capital stock and wages?
No.
Oh, because I mean, if you saw it in like your cost paper,
Yeah.
right? And if you jack up the progressivity of the taxes like that, like your wages
Yeah.
are about 20% or something like this, right? And like nobody's going to be happy about that.
Yeah. So we
That's,
don't have any general equilibrium effects. And that is true, that there are going to be some, but everything would make, I cannot think of an effect that would twist that and be more positive for the life expectancy. If anything, it's going to be worse. Unless you make some assumptions about the price of care, if it's more centralized that the government can negotiate, or there are some other effects about quality. This reform is so expensive that this is the upper bound, the way that we see it.
So just one problem, if you do a targeted reform to only those who did not receive group health insurance, is that such a reform would change firms' incentives of offering group health insurance?
Yeah.
It will be very hard to justify that the probabilities of receiving group health insurance will be the same in both of those environments.
Yeah, in reality, you're right. If we actually model group health insurance, like you do, that you have a premium that is within that group, then it wouldn't make sense for the firms to offer that contract. Here we can do that because it's partial equilibrium. We can just force someone to just buy that contract.